50% or more. Auction Friday. Check the website, northcountrysaves.com.
All righty, we're back on the hotline here on AM 1240. And joining us live on the air is Fred Dicker from the New York Post. Mr. Dicker, how are you?
I'm terrific. Greetings from Albany. Thanks for having me on.
You're officially the Albany Bureau Chief?
Actually, I'm officially the state editor of the New York.
State editor. And are you the dean of North Country or of New York political reporters?
It could be, although it does connote a certain age that I'm not sure I want to admit to. But, yeah, I think that is the case.
Well, I've got to tell you, in case you didn't know, there's a lot of people here in the North Country who are fans of not just yourself, but also the Post, and both online and we get the hard copy edition up here, too.
Sure.
So
it is a different voice. I mean, the Post's editorial page is proudly conservative on many issues, and that's not something you often see these days in New York or here.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is up here today at Fort Drum and then Watertown for her first ever visit. I guess one of the questions I would want to ask her and will ask her is, when she was appointed, we were excited because it was an upstater of a so-called Blue Dog Democrat, and it seems like they're trying to remake her now into something else. Is that what's going on?
It is exactly what's going on, and the reason it's going on is because she is desperately afraid about next year's Democratic primary. The Democratic vote in New York is downstate. It's in New York City. It tends to be very liberal, New York and its suburbs. And the Blue Dog Democrat who has supported gun rights, for instance, or believed in some restrictions on illegal immigrants, is not exactly the kind of profile of a Democrat that Chuck Schumer and Governor Patterson thinks can easily win a primary. So she's running scared, and that's why she's being, I guess you could politely call it, repositioned.
Well, I have to tell you a funny story. About a month ago, Senator Schumer was up announcing a law enforcement initiative, and I was at the press conference, and he asked me to say something, and I said, well, I want to thank you for appointing Senator Gillibrand, and she must be in favor of law enforcement because she has a gun under her bed. And I got a little gentle elbow to the ribs there, and I thought, well, I guess I shouldn't have said that.
Well, I'm glad you did. One of the problems with our politicians these days, as I'm sure you know, Mayor, is that they're not as candid as they ought to be.
You see, I listen to that, and whether she has a gun under her bed, and I'm from upstate, I just have dust under my bed, but if she has one, it doesn't bother me.
Hey, more power to her as far as I'm concerned. The Second Amendment isn't in the Bill of Rights by accident. It's one of our basic rights, right to own guns.
Mm-hmm. So she's going to have a primary, do you think?
Absolutely. And many people think she's a walking dead woman when it comes to politics, that someone like Manhattan's very wealthy, Carolyn Maloney, a congresswoman from Manhattan, is an excellent opponent for her, and the chances of smart money is betting that she'll probably run, and that if she does, it makes it a two-woman field. One man will jump in, a congressman from Long Island, Steve Israel, who's also very well known and is considered an attractive candidate.
Well, he was up here just before the appointment. And
that's one of the reasons he was up here. He was trying to be considered for it. But it's a real dilemma for Kirsten Gillibrand. I know her. She was our congresswoman around the Albany area. She's a very interesting individual, but she's got herself hitched. She's hitched her wagon to Governor Patterson, who's also in very, very big political trouble. And I suspect she'll try to start moving away from Patterson to save herself. But she's, I think, inextricably identified with him, and that's not good for her at the moment.
Now, with Governor Patterson's appointment of her, I thought it was handled, the whole thing with Caroline Kennedy. I realized she twisted in the wind, but she really perhaps wasn't the most appropriate person to appoint, and that was the only way to flush her out, wasn't it?
Well, I don't know about that, because all you had to do was make a decision and say, this is the reason I did it. What happened was that not only did Patterson appoint Gillibrand, but after the appointment was made, or I should say after Caroline Kennedy announced she was taking herself out from consideration, and then the governor appointed Gillibrand, then the governor's people smeared Caroline Kennedy in a way that no one could understand because she had already taken herself out of consideration. Yet, with the governor's approval, someone very close to the governor leaked the claim that Caroline Kennedy wasn't going to be appointed because she had a tax problem, she had a nanny problem, and had marital problems. Well, there were 3 charges, all of which turned out to be false, that you're making against someone who's an icon within your own Democratic Party, and you're doing it to her after she's already withdrawn her name. It had a kind of almost sadistic quality to it. Very, very bizarre, and it really damaged the governor badly.
Now, Democrats usually reserve that kind of treatment for, say, Sarah Palin or somebody like that, who they can like to go after. Mayor Bloomberg running again, huh?
Yes, it looks like he'll be an easy victor. He's having some trouble lining up the Republican line because he dropped out of the Republican Party, which he chose to join back in 2001 because that was the only way he was going to have a major party line to run for mayor. But he's very strong. He's got unbelievable amounts of money, as we know, and he's widely regarded as a good mayor. So he's certainly the odds-on favorite there.
From what I've been reading, and I know I was involved in the Independence Party for a while, as you probably know, not so much now, but he went down to Lenora Falani's group and Fred Newman and all of that yesterday, got their endorsement, and even the news accounts say that basically he gave them money for it or something.
Yeah, he's been very good philanthropically, making very beneficial to himself contributions to not-for-profit groups, and they're controllers of the Independence Party in New York, which is anything but independent, as I'm sure you realize,
right.
Are these two characters who have been long associated with various cult-like groups in the city. New Alliance Party was one of them, and they're controversial figures, and they do maintain a not-for-profit, and the mayor not only has given them contributions, I think he's arranged for the city to give money to the not-for-profit group for plays that they put on in the city. So he's been very nice to them, and he wants that line.
Now, why do we accept that so willingly, and yet everybody castigates Governor Blagojevich for allegedly this? Isn't that the same thing?
Well, I think the difference is that what Bloomberg is doing is legal, and what Blagojevich is alleged to have done was criminal. If you could catch Bloomberg doing what Blagojevich is alleged to have done, then I don't think we'd all be so accepting of it.
Took us all a while to learn how to pronounce that name,
yep.
Certainly. State budget, is it as bad as we hear?
It may be worse. I don't think people can fully appreciate what a disaster it is and how it reverses some 35 years of history that go back to Hugh Carey in 1975, a Democrat who ironically was saying when he said the days of wine and roses had to come to an end in New York, was repudiating Republican policies brought in by Nelson Rockefeller. Huge spending, huge government programs that were bankrupting in New York. Back in 1975, the claim was we were starting on a new road to change that. And arguably, Carey and Cuomo and Pataki and even Spitzer tried to do some of that. And now with Governor Patterson, they've gone back on the Rockefeller Road to a point that takes your breath away. $8 billion in new taxes amidst a recession, and the biggest increase in state spending relative to the rate of inflation probably in history. So it really is startling, and I think the people of New York are not going to be happy with what they get.
Well, didn't that all go on during the Pataki years, too, with that local 1199 and all of the deals with the unions and so on? I mean, there wasn't, with the exception...
It wasn't as bad as this, but some of that went on without a doubt. Pataki, the first 2 years, actually had zero growth in the state budget and claimed that he was a genuine fiscal conservative and acted that way. He had a budget director named Patty Woodworth, who was very well regarded. They did cut state spending. Then Pataki changed initially to try to help Al D'Amato get reelected in 1998, and then to save his own skin. The deal with the big hospital workers union, 1199, was done in 2002 to help him get reelected that year. And there is no question that in the final years, Pataki's budgets went up more than Mario Cuomo's did, notwithstanding the fact that the Conservative Party and the Republican Party were claiming Pataki was a fiscal conservative.
Okay. Now, the 48th Senate District where we live up here has been the focus of a lot of attention the last couple of years because of when Jim Wright stepped down, and we had a special election, then a regular election. And people have never seen the likes of this before up here with this multi-million-dollar nasty campaigns. But are we going to see another one next year with Senator Albertine? Is he the number one target?
He's one of the top targets. I don't know if he's number one or not yet. It's going to be dependent on who the Republicans come up with. But next year is going to be an especially vicious year because the Republicans in the Senate, who now have 30 votes in a House that requires 32 to be in the majority, see it correctly as their last chance to retake the Senate. And because of that, it's going to be as aggressive a campaign as you can imagine. It's also an off year when the party out of power from Washington, from the White House, in this case the Republican Party, usually does better. And I think the feeling certainly now is that if Governor Patterson is still around, that'll help the Republicans. Keep in mind, and just one other point on why next year is so vital, the legislature selected in 2010 will be the legislature which every 10 years as occurs, will redraw the legislative boundaries for the Senate and the Assembly and all congressional seats. And if the Democrats can hold on to the legislature, then you can be sure that all those districts that over the last 40 or 50 years have been drafted to try to help Republicans stay in control of the Senate will all be changed. So it's now or never next year for the Senate Republicans.
Okay, and next year in the gubernatorial race, will it be Andrew Cuomo versus